Hello, in this video we're going to demonstrate how to use a slider. So we're going to create a JavaFX program which simply displays text in a window. However, we're going to use horizontal and vertical sliders to control the position of the text. So let's have a look at a slider. In JavaFX, a slider, you would have seen these if you've used a computer before basically, but this is a horizontal slider and there's a handle somewhere in the slider that the user can click and drag from one end to the other. And then we can access the value of this slider at any point in time and then do something useful with it in our JavaFX application. There are a few other features of sliders that make them a little bit more advanced than scroll bars, for example, because you might be thinking this is very similar looking to a scroll bar. A slider allows us to specify a range of values that this falls between, and we can draw these onto the screen. So there are a few things we can do. We can draw the labels, so this might go from 0 to 10, for example. And we can draw little markings on here. So we can have major markings, and we can specify the interval between these. And we can have minor markings as well, like that. And again, we can specify the intervals. So with that, that's what a slider is, and that's a few of the features that we can use in JavaFX. The other important thing is we get horizontal and vertical sliders. Same functionality, just appears around the other way, rotated 90 degrees. So with that, let's jump over to Eclipse and write this program. We're going to create a new Java project called Slider Demo. This is off screen for you. Slider Demo. And we will add a new class also called Slider Demo. Okay, so the first thing we'll do, like usual, is make our class extend application. And right away, we'll start working on our start method. Okay. So what we're going to do to start with is create the text node that gets displayed in our window. So this is going to be a text object, and we'll call it text. And we will initialize this with a constructor that takes in the initial position. So we'll position this at 2020, and then the string that we're going to display is JavaFX programming. Okay, so that's all we need to do to create our text. What we're going to do now is create our horizontal and vertical sliders. So what we need is the slider class, and this will be our horizontal slider. So SL horizontal is the variable we'll use, and we're going to use the default constructor. Why is that complaining, I wonder? Oh, missing extra equals sign there. Oops. Okay, so what we're going to do now is make our slider show the labels and show the tick marks, because by default, when we create a slider object, all we get is basically only the slider. We don't get these ticks and we don't get the labels. If we want them, and usually you do, not always, we have to enable them, and the way we do that is SL horizontal dot show tick oops, I forgot to set show tick labels to true. So now our slider will display the tick labels. What we also want is to show the tick marks. So again, very simple. Set show tick marks to true. All right. Next up, that's all we need for our horizontal slider, by the way. So what we're going to do now is create our vertical slider. Now, it's the same class. It's the slider class. We'll call this one vertical. Again, we'll use the default constructor. So by default, when we create a slider object, it defaults to be a horizontal slider. So if you want your slider to be vertical, we need to actually set that. And we do that with the orientation property. So SL vertical dot set orientation, and it takes an orientation value. So we use the orientation class dot vertical, like that. So next up, we're going to enable our tick labels and our tick marks. So same as before. Okay. Next up, we're going to initialize our vertical slider with a value. And this is very easy. We just go SL vertical dot set value to be 100 in this case. So we can use the set value method to quickly change the position of our slider. Next up, we're going to create a pane to store the text node in. So this is going to be a pane object, and we'll call this pane for text. We're going to use the default constructor, and we're going to add our text node to this. So pane for text dot get children dot add our text node. Next up, we're going to create a border pane to store both of our sliders and our text pane. So border pane default constructor for our border pane. Next up, we're going to add our 3 components, or our 3 nodes. So we're going to set the pane for text to be our center. Oops. We're going to set our horizontal slider to be at the bottom of the window and our vertical slider to be at the right of the window. So pane.set bottom. What do we do? Horizontal. Pane.set right. Our vertical slider. Okay, so what we're going to do now is set our scene and our primary stage and get this thing on screen. So scene object. We're going to add our pane that we just created, and the window size will be 450 by 170. So next up, we're going to set up our primary stage. Okay, now what we'll do is create our main method. Call launch. And we have enough now that we can run our program. So run this, and you can see what we have here is we have our 2 sliders, our horizontal and our vertical slider, and they work. We can drag this circle around, but nothing happens when we do that. So obviously what's missing here is our listeners. We want to listen for when the value of our sliders change. So let's go ahead and do that now. What we're going to do is right here, just before we create our scene, is add some listeners to our sliders. So let's do the horizontal one first. What we're after is the value property. We want to listen for when the value property changes. So we're going to add a listener to that property. Okay, so we're going to use a lambda. So what we're going to have is OV, and then the arrow, and then an opening closing block of code. All we're going to do is update the horizontal position of our text node based on the value of our slider. So text.setX. And what we're going to have in here is we're going to get the value of our horizontal slider. And then we're going to multiply this by the width of our pane. And then also we need to divide it by the maximum value of our slider. So what we're actually doing here is essentially converting the value of our horizontal slider to be a percentage from left to right of our window. So we need to divide all this by the maximum value of our slider. When you're using sliders, you can actually set the minimum and maximum values. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to divide by our maximum value to get the position. So let's run this. You can see by default we get a slider in the range of 0 to 100. So as we move this, you can see now our text node follows our slider. So now let's do the same thing for the vertical one. I'm actually going to copy and paste this because it's pretty much exactly the same code, except we are operating on the Y value and using our vertical slider. So we want to set Y in here, use our SL vertical slider, and we need to get the height of our pane for text. So let's save and run this. And now, oh, we have this backwards. My mistake. As you can see, so what we have here is our maximum value for our slider is when it's at the top. However, the window coordinates in JavaFX have 0, 0 being the top left. So we obviously need to subtract instead of add. We need to change the order in which this happens. So what we're going to have instead is SL vertical dot get max subtract all of this. Actually, we don't need the parentheses, but it's a good habit to get into. If you're not exactly sure on the order of operations, just wrap them in parentheses and then you know for certain. Now when we run this, we get our slider behaving as it should. So with that, that's it for this video. We've demonstrated how to use sliders in JavaFX. Thanks for watching.